Brief introduction on the panel. So starting from the other side, Steve Mancini is the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer at Cylance. He was, prior to this at Intel, which is where kind of both of us worked, barely knew each other. We kind of, we had the connection through Jeff, actually. So Jeff was the connection. And he was at Intel for 17 years, where he established security programs, security community outreach. He does a lot of stuff like co-chairing efforts to formalize a threat intelligence, sharing policy frameworks, a lot of the work outside of what I would call duties at Cylance. So welcome, Steve. Rick here is with ADT, and he's the Senior Manager of Security Operations at ADT. And our journey with Rick started, I would say, what, 1.5 years, actually, almost 2 years ago, where he started with a community version of the product and tested it, and then went straight into production as immediately after purchase. So I think we would love to hear maybe in the panel about your journey on justifying the value of orchestration. So Rick has been in information security field for almost for over 10 years, serving in multiple different roles. And current responsibilities include improving SOC operations and threat hunting, which is another thing which we will touch upon because that's becoming a common theme as well. Yaron here, Yaron is CISO at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas City, where he oversees the development and operations of cybersecurity practice. Prior to joining Blue Cross Blue Shield, Yaron was at Cerner Corporation for the information security business there, business partner for Intuit. And he's also been with, he's been an information security architect and product manager for eBay. So you've seen the product side and the practitioner side. That'll be an interesting perspective. And then lastly, Jeff. Jeff is with US Bank, and he's Senior Manager Cyber Threat Response at US Bank. He joined US Bank last year, July 27, which is roughly when we started working with the US Bank team on the proof of concept. And he leads the cyber threat response program, which includes CSIRT, threat hunting, and the incident response coordination. Also, he's responsible for delivering the SAO efficiency to the organization. So we can say he's betting on Demisto. I can safely say that. We hope to deliver on that promise. And he has a lot of background in Unix and also working with external organizations like FIRST. So I've seen his presentations at FIRST, and that's one of the areas where he's been speaking a lot. So that's kind of our panel, guys. Very, very honored to have this panel. With that, I would love to start maybe from Steve and start with kind of a very simple question, which is your view of role of security orchestration in your organization and the #1 use case which you think is most valuable to you.
Okay, this sounds good. So I think that I come from this at a very different perspective than for some folks, because without sounding like I'm marketing our product, I didn't walk into an environment with thousands of malware outbreaks. I didn't walk into a lot of automated problems. Instead, I walked into a very small, fast, agile, quick-growing startup. And I had to immediately build up a security team that had a lot of different capabilities. Demisto was my way of being able to grab pinpoint experts and know that I could use their capabilities even if they weren't at the desk. So for me, my #1 use case was to help as a force multiplier to really taking my expertise and being able to apply it across the board so that the small team I had could actually have vacations, see their families, because in most startups you don't get to do that. But I didn't want to go that route. I was deathly afraid of alert fatigue. And so for me, it was really about how do we capture that information. Plus, as a company that was growing quickly, what my company looked at when we started, we were about 200 people. A year later, we were 800. In 1 year, we went to 4 sites across the world, right? We have a place in Ireland, we have one in Austin. And so I had to quickly grow an environment. And so I needed something that as we grew and as we learned, we could find a way to codify how those things were happening and be able to know that with some degree of certainty, I was able to have the ability to reproduce the same effects and the same delivery of response and detection across a growing environment.
Thank you. Jeff, your thoughts?
My thoughts as the new kid on the block. I think the role of orchestration for us for the bank really started several years ago. So the importance was always understood. Being in the financial services sector, being able to work with all of the other financial services companies, being an early investor in things like Soltra to bring Stix and Taxi to help the early days of being able to do orchestration and some automation work. So that was really important. In terms of our first use cases and what we're looking at, the company has a great deal of interest in anti-phishing, phishing for employee credentials and bank information, as well as data loss prevention. So exfiltrating customer information would be bad. So those are the first couple of things that we're really looking at landing, and that's what we worked with when we did the POC in order to bring Demisto into the environment.
Fantastic.
So for us, it's similar but somewhat also different. So I'm the first CISO for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas City, and I don't know how much you guys know about Blue Cross Blue Shield in general, but there are 36 different Blue Crosses across the nation. And we are all autonomous companies, separate companies, and we're all working under the umbrella, which is like a franchise. So for us in Kansas City, it's really difficult to find people. And the way I think about our analysts and our engineers, it's almost like F-35 pilot, if you will. You have this super sophisticated plane, you fly into enemy territory, and also you have to be worried about planes that are chasing you, and surface-to-air missiles, and radars, and so on and so forth. And oh, by the way, you also need to fly the plane. And for me, it's the same thing with our analysts, because I need to have F-35 pilots, operating and defending our members' data, but at the same time, I cannot find them in Kansas City. It's very difficult to find them. I have very, very few. You go here in the Bay Area, you go to LinkedIn or whatever, any job board, you're looking for security people. There's probably hundreds of out there. I probably know most of the security people in the Kansas City area. So, it's kind of hard, to attract and retain them. And also, when we are competing in our city with other employers, like Cerner Corporation, which is a technology company, to ask somebody to come and work for a health insurance company, it's not that sexy. So how do you deal with all of that, and how do you scale? How do you automate? How do you do a lot of things to keep up? Because we have the exact same problems like anybody else. And that's where we see orchestration as one of the capabilities to allow us to do that.
So Rick, your use cases.
Yeah, so we actually had a very specific use case. We had a phishing problem. We changed the phishing, what we were using. We moved our email provider to the cloud, and we also ramped up our phishing simulations that we were sending out to all of our employees. So in return, we ended up with a lot more phishing emails being submitted to us and creating more of a backlog of incidents in our system. And what we really saw was it put a spotlight on our processes and procedures, which were all manual, and we didn't have any orchestration at that point, or very minimal. We were using multiple tools, just trying to gather information to try and from say indicators, trying to get more intelligence on those indicators. We'd be going to multiple sites, multiple providers to try and get that information before coming up with a conclusion of whether something is malicious or not. So for us, once we put that into Demisto and we were able to automate those tasks and orchestrate through all of our tools, we became a lot faster in our response time.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's actually very interesting, right? Both Jeff and Rick, the number one use case, and we see this quite common, even with very mature customers or smaller organizations, phishing being the number one use case. One of the things that I'd like to share I've seen is these are organizations who might even have 2 or 3 different technologies to solve the phishing problem, because the phishing problem on the technology side, there's a bunch of tools, right? So Mimecast or PhishMe for awareness and other pieces. But the process is where I'm sure how you automated, which is where Demisto or orchestration tools can actually help, because there's this whole thing of bunch of education is done, awareness is done, which generates too much noise. Now, those are not actual phish stuff, so it'll never be caught by a tool like Mimecast. but that is an awareness measurement. Another thing, which is a very large healthcare organization, a Fortune 20 healthcare organization, which is a customer, I cannot name them publicly here, which is interesting on phishing front, is they actually basically showed the awareness metrics as the result, right? So the Demisto metrics and dashboard are a function of showing how much awareness is there. Because if the 95% of your reported phishing emails by employees are actually false positive because the automation closed it as false positive, then you know the awareness is actually going. So the number are going up, and if the larger percentage grow, the awareness is going up rather than actual fish being caught. So some actually that happens to be the number one use case, is what I'm hearing as well. Now another question which is an interesting one, again, for some people who have done the orchestration or starting, how do you measure the success of an orchestration product, right? Or measure the success of an orchestration project, for example? Are you guys thinking of specific metrics in reduction of MTTR? What are your thoughts? And I might be setting up myself for some metrics and measurements, but I'm okay with that. You want to start it?
Sure. Yeah, so for us, we're not really looking at specific metrics just yet. We're more focused on getting the analysts to be more effective at what they're doing, being able to make better decisions on the incidents that they're handling, whether it is a false positive or true positive, or needs further investigation or escalation. Obviously, we also want a lower MTTR along with that.
Okay.
We don't have the metrics just yet because we also are fairly early in our implementation. But we have a bit of a different use case. We're also going to work on the phishing one. We are not there just yet. But we actually started with more of an operational use case. And actually, we are a Cylance client. And that was not pre-orchestrated or so. But basically, what we do there, I mean, Cylance was being deployed, on several thousands of endpoints for us. And we actually have one of the girls on the team that she is babysitting Cylance, and not very much from a Cylance perspective, but more like making sure it's actually deployed on all the endpoints and up and running and register and so on and so forth. And we have issues with people that don't bring their laptop to work for 3 weeks or whatnot, and it didn't register. And all that process takes a very, very long time and a lot of efforts from one person just to babysit, if you will, endpoints. And it's not because of the Cylance problem, it's kind of more because of the way that we manage our process internally in the company. So we automated that. So right now, as soon as, every day there is a process that is running, and as soon as we detect a machine that is either on the network but doesn't have Cylance, or have Cylance but not registered, or have Cylance but not updated, and so on and so forth, we look at all of those, and we proactively, push those, and now she doesn't need to do it anymore. So going back to the people problem, now I freed up her time to actually go and focus on other things as well. It's also helped with her kind of burnout, if you will, because how fun it is to just babysit, antimalware every day. So.
I can never remember for MTTR, is it mean time to respond or mean time to remediate? So I think that those are different metrics, and I think that Demisto and SAO in general has a role to play in both of those. Certainly mean time to respond by kicking off a playbook automatically, that's going to drop that number pretty significantly. Mean time to remediate kind of depends on what the use case is and how much of that can be fully automated from start to finish versus what's going to need time for an analyst to actually get involved and dive in and help guide some of the decision making that might be necessary in a complex playbook or, for example, in a broad incident response run book. For myself and metrics, I've always hated metrics, but I've probably got a manager who wants to see them. And so it's going to be interesting to figure out what that balance is in trying to figure that out. Like you mentioned at the top, the ink is barely dry on our contract, so we're just figuring out how to start our journey there, but I have a feeling that I'm going to be asked for metrics sooner rather than later. And it's going to be interesting to see how we do that. You know, for the 2 use cases that we're landing now, with the phishing one, there's a fair amount of automation that can be done there. I know that, you know, our training of our employees is sending a lot of phishing messages, a lot of general marketing messages, and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see things like maybe how do we get true positives versus how many are just marketing that you know, employees are sick of seeing, versus what's really a phish and versus what's really something that's not very interesting at all. But as we get into some of the complex malware analysis stuff, a lot of that sort of stuff can be done automatically. You know, can we push a incident response package to that endpoint very quickly to collect all of the information that we want to see? Can we process the indicators of compromise in a very highly automated fashion? That should run very quickly, and I think that it will wind up putting information in the analyst's hands a lot faster than and especially when we're in a distributed environment where we've got some analysts who might be in London versus in the United States, and being able to do things, and you know, laptops coming and going on the network whenever they darn well please. I think that a lot of this stuff will really help reduce the amount of time that it takes for an analyst to get involved.
Sure. First, I want the playbook that you have on Cylance. Okay? That sounds cool. Second, kudos, because I know your boss is here somewhere in the audience, so you just sent a clear message about your feeling about metrics. Awesome job. So I can't actually give you that answer of, you know, I have this great bar chart, because quite honestly, from my perspective, the best metric I have is that my guys are happy. My security team is energized, interested. We have a Jira board that continually grows with, this would be really cool if we could find a way to do it, right? And as a kid who grew up with Micronauts and Legos, I like Legos, and that's what this is for these guys. Obviously, there's a certain degree of happiness from not having to do alert fatigue, right? When we get the same kinds of silly alerts about BECs and things like that as everybody else. But the other side of it for me is, when I look at my guys, the first answer to we have a problem isn't let's go buy a tool. The first answer is, do we have everything in-house already to do this? And so one of the things that I keep a keen eye on is, did the current existing stack of capabilities that I have make it so I don't have to go buy a point solution, and how much money did I just save my company? Not only in just the pure value of the product, but also in the engineering resources, the sustain, the deploy, you know, the onboarding, all of those things. That to me is an also very interesting metric, to be able to say, I can protect 800 employees against this many attacks based upon this, and at the cornerstone are these 4 or 5 capabilities that all play together well, both are all extensible to some degree, and as a result, let me dodge the vendor single point solution bullet.
It's actually very interesting. I love the fact metrics as the happiness as being the metric, because one of the core pillars, again, I've seen just learning from the products that have been done right, is basically they make sure the operator is the happiest person there, because once you do that, then you get the viral distribution of the product. So this is really good to hear. And another question on the metrics and kind of measuring the success, there's a flip side. So in your experience, what would you advise other prospects to, like the caution before starting an orchestration project? Like, what are the gotchas to be thought about from your perspective? Maybe we'll start the other way, yeah.
Okay, so I think that from the outset, one of the things is to understand, this is again, I'm gonna fall back on the people person question quickly, is understand that automation can be seen as a threat, right? If you have a SOC, people will start to think, oh God, you're trying to AI me out of a job. And you need to very quickly understand that you start this outset, what you're telling them is, I'm not getting rid of you, I'm empowering you to work on far more interesting things. And that's not personal because my team is too small, but I know people, I've had conversations, I have a lot of friends in the industry, where there are folks who might be their level 1 SOC are terrified that some machine learning tool is going to replace them, and that's not gonna happen. Anybody who went to DEF CON last year and saw the DARPA research, that the very keynote on that was, this is not a replacement, this is a force multiplier and an amplifier. But I think there's also a really fast opportunity to fall under sort of an analysis paralysis, because there's so many places that you can run with this. And I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and then suddenly you're saying, and now I need an army of 25 software engineers. pace yourself, find out what your best spaces are, catalog where you get your best value quickly so that you can really show that success, because otherwise you're going to find so many opportunities to use this or these kinds of tools that you're quickly going to have this stack of things you do not achieve because that stack is so deep, and someone may hold you to that. Like, you made all these promises of rainbows and unicorns, or as it was just said, unicorns and lightsabers, and then you're not delivering. So really, this is an endurance thing. This is not a sprint, and that, I think, is the best point, is to really approach it from that perspective.
Structure and planning, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I think that my answer kind of follows Steve a little bit from the standpoint of you've got to know your environment, you've got to know your people, and you've got to know what problems you're trying to solve. And so if you don't have a very good handle on your environment, I think that there's going to be some issues with being successful there. I think that if you need to know what information you're collecting and how you can process it and deal with everything. So I think being successful also looks at how structured are your response processes already, and do you understand what all of the inputs are and what the outputs are expected to be, so that you can actually work your way through the various steps, because it has to be a closed loop process. It can't be a very open-ended sort of thing because you won't get to the end. So I think that understanding how you want to get from point A to point B is going to be crucial in measuring the success. And thank you for teeing up it's a marathon, not a sprint, because my manager is in the audience, and I think that he thinks that we're running a sprint.
Not a sprint. Not a sprint. It's Legos. You'll play with them for 10 years.
I think, like in many things, usually when we fall short is around process. And before you can automate something, you need to make sure you have the right process in place. Because if you're going to automate a bad process, I mean, the consequences are going to be disastrous. So I think we need to get the process first, then automate.
Yeah, that was well said. I would say one playbook at a time. We started with, one use case and tried to perfect that, and then we moved on to the next one and the next one after that. And through that process, each team member was able to learn more about the tool and what they could do with it, which also had them coming up with their own ideas of things they wanted to do. So I would just say, yeah, take it one playbook at a time and kind of build up your knowledge and expertise of it.
That's a very good advice, and I think Steve mentioned this. So Steve, you guys are maintaining an internal Jira of ideas that you want to do with Demisto, and you guys are tracking that similar things, like what else could we do next as well. So is it like almost building a roadmap for playbooks internally on what use cases to automate? Interesting. Okay, that's actually a very good advice. I mean, we had not thought about it because we see a ton of our customers do these playbooks in the beginning phase of deployment, but then ongoing cycle, which I think is a very good advice, which is on an ongoing basis, start to track these, build these. Related to that, and I think this is an area where we have all talked more. I know there's a lot of chatter about community and sharing, but reality-wise, there's very little action, right? I mean, playbook sharing. I think my question is somewhat an open-ended question. Do you guys think there is value in sharing of playbooks, or are they unique enough? And I'm actually the reason why I'm asking this playbook, there's product capabilities which we can let you export and import. We do that today, but I think the playbook definition level on how granular and how defined the processes could be different in different organizations. So maybe an open discussion here on what do you guys think about sharing? How should we enable sharing? And that's probably some notes for me to take as well back.
Yeah, I think sharing would be great, especially because I think some people might not know where to even start. So if they had a couple examples of some good playbooks that were in use, that were working for others, they could be a lot more effective at generating their own. Or maybe they wouldn't even need to. They could just use one that's already built.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we are trying not to reinvent the wheel, and we're trying to learn from others. the good thing about the Blue Association in general is that we have a lot of collaboration internally, and we share a lot of information with other Blue plans. So in a way, because of the nature of our business, there are a lot of similarities, but each one is also different. I know not all of them are Demisto clients just yet, but I don't think it matters much. I mean, I think if we can get to a point where we have more and more people who are using it and contributing the ideas forward, and coming to sessions like this and meeting other practitioners and sharing that information, I'm seeing that in other parts of the industry. And the more we can show that value, I think the more you'll see that happening.
By the way, I think that's a very good point that Demisto customers may not be all of them are Demisto customers. And I think one of the directional thing, so there's an organization, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, I would encourage you guys to look at it. It's run by the Johns Hopkins University Aeronautics Lab, JPL. And they're basically building this. Right now, it's still, I would imagine what Styx was 7 to 8 years ago. That's where this is. But the idea is develop this playbook sharing format. And we are part of that. It's called IACD. Very early, nascent stages, interactive, adaptive cyber defense. And the core there is have a format of the playbook in a way which it could be exported and imported into another tool, like where Styx got to, which I'm very happy finally we got to. There's enough struggles on the way as we saw. So yeah, I mean, I think Demisto playbooks, that's one of the reasons why architecturally 2 years ago, we decided that it's not going to be a Python. It's a YAML format, which is basically exportable, transportable, you can change it. But yeah, I think that's a very good point, which is we're big believers. I think if you really want the space to go big, you have to have a neutral format. But anyways, Jeff, your thoughts on sharing. Do you think there'll be playbooks?
So about the IACD stuff, the bank actually helped and get all of that started back in like 2013, 2014. But for myself, I've always been a proponent of information sharing. The only way that we as a collective get any better is to share our knowledge. And so I've always been a big proponent of that. Steve and I, when we've worked together, have been part of information sharing groups. We've started information sharing groups. We've ended information sharing groups. Along with that, it's one thing to say, well, here's the type of things that you would need in order to be successful in doing a particular playbook. But given the difference in environments, the difference in tool sets, and the different, there are so many variables that would be involved in just sharing a playbook verbatim that it might not work real well. But if you've got somebody who's reasonably competent, I imagine that they would be able to take the basics of that playbook and understand what's behind it in order to rapidly do it specifically for their environment. So I would absolutely be in favor of doing those sorts of things.
So I'll show my age here a little bit. Anybody remember Snort? Yes. Okay, look at all the heads raising and the hands raising, right? Yes, thank you, Ben. Do you remember the community around writing Snort signatures? And exactly, thank you. And so that's really where I see you guys, is that Snort came out with that exact same notion of I could write a signature, he could write a signature, his might be better than mine, and suddenly I'll take credit and write it and say that I wrote that one. I think that there is enough commonality in the security stack, the infrastructure stack, the IR playbooks, because I can tell you for every vendor I look at and I say, show me your IR plan, it looks like it's a cut and paste right out of Sans, right? And so there's still some very common core framework. And Ron and I were talking about this, the idea of maybe even having like a monthly meeting where someone says, let's get the community together, and they talk through a cool playbook that they wrote. I think that there's a lot of really interesting opportunity in that space to build on each other. Huh? Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, for some folks, it's like, because we all are attacking different spaces based upon what's the priority in our environment, right? When Jeff and I used to work together, our bosses used to notoriously say, how does our security stack compare to, and then just throw a rock in any direction down here in San Francisco and you hit a tech company. And our answer was always, every tech company and every company is going to build their security program based upon their deep bench strength, right? You go to Google, their IR plan looks nothing like Salesforce because they're very different bench strengths. So if I can leverage your bench strength in my environment, that's a win for me, and I can give it back to you. Though, I mean, apparently he's wrote the playbook on Cylance already, so he's got me up on that. But really, I think that's it, right? My bench strength, his bench strength, we're all coming from different places. And you may find, very humbly, that someone has a better way to do it. So I think it's an absolute imperative that we learn how to do that quickly.
I want to add one more thing, and just to the comment I made before. I think before we can share the playbook, we need to build the process. And once we understand the process, then we can develop a playbook around that. I think where I see the communities oftentimes fall short is that we don't really know what the process is. And yes, we have a playbook, but the playbook is very specific, and it's very difficult for me to disseminate what the playbook actually does or the value of the playbook without understanding what the process is. So if we can tie to the process first, socialize that, and collaborate on that, and then we can develop the playbooks for that.
Very cool. Any questions in the audience that we can take? I'll have more questions, but I want to invite thoughts, questions, challenges. You guys can challenge this on the shortcomings as well. So let's talk a little bit. There's some talk on collaboration externally with organizations. One of the things that I see is our tool being used for internal, call it the best practices documentation collaboration, right? So Adam Zollman's presentation was all around knowledge management, and your comment about get the process right. I am starting to see this increased trend of people saying, hey, what's an analyst's head? I want it down in the tool so that the next analyst could be trained faster, learn faster. My question is, I think that whole model is fantastic. We enable this to some extent, but it's going to be still ad hoc. So are you guys thinking on these lines? How do you train your new analysts? Do they learn from the playbooks? Are you guys thinking that the best practices should be playbooks even though they cannot be automated? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Rick? We'll start here.
Well, I think for oncoming new analysts, for us, the playbooks help to kind of teach them and guide them through an incident, and the collaboration that they might have with others, they might see a better way to do something. And so that might result in a change of a playbook.
Cool.
Usually I'm struggling with the concept of best practice, because who decide or who define what a best practice is? And best practice for one may be different for somebody else. So I think in terms of, yes, creating a baseline or creating something where we can download the head of the analyst and build that into the tool and retain that knowledge and experience, absolutely. But also keep that open enough so others can continuously make improvements and enhance that. There was one thing I wanted to say about.
Jeff, any thoughts on onboarding analysts?
Yeah, so I guess the first question is, what type of analyst are you bringing on board? Is it a level 1, level 2, level 3 type of analyst? Because they're going to bring different experiences with them along those lines. And I think that one of the things that I've always been a proponent of is building the team from within. So level 1 should aspire to be the level 2s, level 2 should aspire to be level 3s. And so in order to get there, they need to build their experience. I think it would be one thing to simply read and understand a playbook between here and there, but it would be another to challenge the notions and maybe say, well, is there a better way to do it? I think that there's a lot of value in that. But if you're bringing a level 3 person in, you're buying their experience, and so I think that you should expect some disruption in your playbooks from somebody who's a pretty senior type by challenging just about everything that you've done, instead of somebody who's just coming up from the ranks who is just building on their experience from inside the company.
So part of this, I think, for me is that one of the things that actually brought us into becoming a customer was the war room and the conversational aspect of the war room, which Jeff and I used to use a different technology back at Intel, IRC, for those of you who remember that stuff, before InstaJam or whatever, InstaChat, whatever people are doing these days. But what we started with was that reason was that we would be able to do the conversation, and we would have the senior analyst asking questions of the junior analyst and have it there. And one of my lead guy and I have been talking about this, and what we actually want to do in the next steps is, can we build tabletop exercises that are based upon events that some people have seen and some haven't, take each one of our members and say, not only our security team, by the way, our IT team, our Sec DevOps team, all the other folks who touch this process, put them down and say, we're about to run a tabletop. You don't get to talk to anybody else. Tell me how you would handle this situation. And then bring them together, have them discuss it, and figure out, did the DevOps guy actually have a really great idea that nobody else would have known about because we didn't have that? So bringing those analysts up to speed for us is going to become iterative tabletop kinds of exercises. We're thinking maybe like once a month over lunch, right? We'll send that out on a Monday. Everybody will have till Friday. They don't talk to each other. Friday, I'll pay for lunch. We'll all go out and we'll talk about it. And so that's kind of where we're going. But we also want to use the cases that we've seen, because that's one of the things that we talk about is consistency of how we handle. And we're still learning how to be consistent, right? I'll have something like a stolen laptop come through, and it'll be handled a certain way. Or we had an incident where somebody was detonating malware by mistake on the wrong device and how it was handled. But we injected certain questions where the senior analyst asked the junior analyst, at any point in time, did you think this was an insider threat? No, they didn't. Okay, so now we're going to add to the playbook, stop, think, ask the right people, is there a possibility this is an insider problem? How did we learn that? By looking at how we all work together in that way.
I think that's a great point, and we actually did something very, very similar. We actually did a red team simulation, and we even didn't tell the team that we were doing it, so only Cindy and I knew about that. And sure enough, the people we worked with, it was a Thursday at 4:30 in the afternoon, which is kind of mean. They just dropped a malware on one of the machines, and it was interesting to see how the team reacted to that. And now they think it's the real thing, and they are responding the best way that they believe that they can respond to that. And then you start seeing the personalities come out and how they all interact and how they work together. And at some point, one of them turned into me and said, "Is this a test?" So I pulled like an Al Pacino from the recruit line, and I said, "Everything is a test." So he's like, "Okay." So they just kind of went back, and we worked that incident, until like 8 that night. Everything, yes. Yeah.
Somebody else has.
So, we worked that incident till like 8 that night, and I kind of felt bad about it a little bit, but, it was a great learning experience, and exactly as you said, we went through a process of, okay, how do we triage it? How do we react to it? And then where the gaps are? And based on that, we're improving our processes.
We actually did something very similar with one of our pen tests, where the pen test had been running for a while, and we gave them different privileges, so we weren't just assuming start outside, we actually had them start inside. And then at the end, one of the requirements was the pen testers were going to come in and sit down with my team and show them how they did every step. And as they're doing it, my senior guy is sitting there going, yeah, right here. And he's walking through where he caught the different parts. And the pen testers literally stopped and looked at it and said, what is that? And we pointed out the product, and we said, actually, this is, and they were floored by how much data we were capturing about them, but we didn't know if it was them or not. But they literally were in the same place of, is this a pen test? And I'm like, maybe.
Fantastic, guys. So I think coming to the wrap, I think one of the things I'm always eager to see, what's the future of Demisto or orchestration in your organization. We have most of the folks focused on incident response, except Yaron is thinking of a different use case. But I'd love to hear going beyond that incident response, right? Maybe talk a little bit about threat hunting, Jeff, or other use cases to kind of plant seed in the mind, seed of thought. We have a couple of customers thinking of taking this to AppSec. So as they do their web application security vulnerability analysis, how that flow goes through. Because eventually it's the process which could be then taken to an automation. But I would love to hear, maybe we'll start with you, Jeff. What are you guys thinking on threat hunting? What are the options, even if you guys don't have any plans, but knowing the technology, what you know about the technology?
Plans on how to mature our threat hunting process. Question asked by my manager to me last week.
God, it's like I am being planted by your manager here.
Smiling too, which is a good thing. Jeff, you're doing a good job.
No, I think he's smiling because he wants to know if I'm going to answer it the same way I did then. But first things first, if you're going to run a pen test at 4:30 on a Thursday, that's not so bad. Try doing it on a Black Friday. Threat hunting, at my previous job, when we set up a case management tool and did a little bit of very, very rudimentary orchestration, I had structured our case management solution to look at hunting from a very open perspective. Because if you're hunting for something, you're not sure what you're looking for. So having an SLA tied to, analyzing a log is not going to work very well. But you're also not going to, and depending on what you're hunting for, is going to guide what log source you're looking at. So if you hunt for something and you find something, then you're going to change your playbook a little bit, and now you're going to get more deeper into the incident response, and you're going to get more structured. So that flow from hunting to incident response to full-blown forensic investigation, there needs to be some ability built into that in order to make that happen. The threat hunting program for us at the bank, we need to do a fair amount of maturity revving on, and we need to be better at the process that each one of our hunters is using. And so I think that there are definitely some places that orchestration can help us, especially when you look at, everybody's got a maturity model, right? You go look for maturity model out there and you can find 50 of them. And if you look for threat hunting maturity models, you'll get probably 10. I don't know. But there's a couple of them out there that are pretty interesting, from going from hypothesis to discovery to response to automation. In getting through that cycle, I think is really going to be what the structure needs to look like. And if the Demisto product can help us get there, that's great. And I really think that that's what we're looking at doing.
Other use cases, Steve, beyond incident response?
Oh, this is the Lego thing again. So vulnerability management.
That's a good one.
Is an interesting space that I want to play with, right? We want to look at a way to figure out, using mail listeners to say, someone sends me a piece of mail and says, scan endpoint. And we go look it up and say, is this the owner? If this isn't the owner, mail the owner. Have the owner tell us it's okay. Then take Nessus or one of the OpenVAS, load it up, fire it off, send the results. Compliance. Anybody else do compliance stuff and hate it as much as I do? Yeah, right? There is so many points of evidence gathering that could be automated, right? When I have to validate, do I have passwords of a certain strength? Do I have certain log files in place? Do I have an email? I collect all of our meeting minutes for all the obligatory risk management stuff. And when my compliance director says, SOC 2 time, I would love to find a way to go, this maps to this maps to this, go do this task and get it off my back. Next step is when my vendors or when my customers start asking me for the right to audit. If I could find a way to right to audit my way out of having to do that stuff by saying, tell me what you want, give me a standard, and I can go map and collect the evidence that I'm willing to give you, there's a really interesting space there. BCDR, we've started to touch that conversation of not necessarily the whole go collect information, but the procedural aspects of Demisto have a really interesting play for us in the BCDR space as well, right? Because when something breaks is the worst time to have to go figure those things out. And then the final one for us, not to hog it on, I'm stealing all of your good ideas in case you guys haven't figured it out, is external threat, right? Your external threat program is the last one of those. That's for us is how do you face on the externals, social pages, paste bin, all those kinds of things are where we're going to dig to.
Yeah, the vision for us, so we started kind of more on the operational side, but the reason for that is because we see it holistically as part of defense and how we are making sure that our defenses are up and working and running all the time. So the combination between the capabilities, the defense capabilities, and then continuous simulation where it's automatic or manual, and automating all of that, that's where we see the Demisto is part of the center and the brain behind all of that.
Yeah, we're also starting to look at compliance and vulnerability management and using the tool in that fashion. We already have a couple playbooks, just simple stuff for, say, like a system that stops logging. Send an email to that user and get a response, or create a ticket in your enterprise ticketing system. stuff like that. That's a manual task for some of our team members that they spend time on that just can be automated. Helps us out a lot. Also, in terms of threat hunting, most of our hunting just starts with a search for an IOC or asking different questions. And if we get data back, it usually gives us more questions. So where I see it going in the future would be maybe being able to pick tasks and add those to the playbooks to kind of continue that threat hunting investigation versus having a static playbook, being able to add certain tasks in to continue that investigation.
And that's a good feature request, guys. So coming up to time, so I think there's a question on the screen which is great product, concepts, ecosystem. Now what brings it together, showcase value? Is there a next-gen Demisto powered SOC X.0 customer experience center? Actually, I will do the plug. So Wipro has built an amazing, people call it executive briefing center or whatever the term is. I think Wipro's term is SVIC. Here actually in Mountain View with amazing equipment, right? The largest of the largest touchscreen where you would have seen voice-enabled experience. So we are working with them on a next-gen SOC experience with a bunch of our technology partners, Vectra, Insights, and us, Calvio combined. So again, for folks, I'm happy to be the point on scheduling. If you guys know your Wipro counterpart, you guys can schedule, but I would encourage that. I think that is one of the works that I've been working with them for the last couple of months, and that integrated experience, which we're going to launch in a month, is amazing. I think shows you how we believe the SOC experience should be, including automation, collaboration, bunch of other pieces. So that was that. Again, are there any closing thoughts from the panel here? Otherwise,
Well, start at that end. I have to.
start at that end. Anything you guys want to share? Otherwise, we'll probably... Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot. That was very, very useful. And some closing remarks. We would love to have you guys all join us at the party. It's a couple of hours break. The party starts at 7. The RSA show guys would not let us start early because they don't want it to overlap with the RSA opening receptions. So we look forward to seeing you guys at the party. We start at 7. If you guys want to hang around here, you're more than welcome. We're going to have drinks even earlier and then Wi-Fi. The party it's a pre-party. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks a lot. Thank you, guys.